What's up, everyone? Welcome to the video. We are here breaking down week 9 of the NFL season for DraftKings and FanDuel. And if this is your first time here, what I do in these videos specifically for these main slates, but you look at my player pool at each position, not going over the entire slate because that would take forever and waste a lot of your time. We'll build a single entry tournament lineup as we progress through it. And then I'll run my optimizer at the end with my projections, ownership projections that I have currently in place on Friday morning to see who's popping the most as of right now. If that sounds great to you, well, the one thing you can do in return for me, if you can leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're brand new, and hit that bell so you don't notified whenever I post new content. If you have any questions, concerns, or anything funny you want to tell me in the comment section below, feel free to do just that. And as always, we will start with the quarterback position. And I should mention, if you do want access to the spreadsheet with all the data you'd ever need, color-coded nice and neat so it's quite easy to follow, with projections, ownership projections, cheat sheet, the optimizer, the Discord community, all that fun stuff. And I don't just do it for the NFL, I do it for all sports, NASCAR, NBA, which is going on daily right now, and baseball, but that's not currently in season. So if you want to check it out, link is down below in the description for that. All for a very fair price point, and it makes everything a little bit easier for you on the weekend to construct lineups. Anyway, let's talk Josh Allen here. $8,500 on DraftKings, $9,300 over on FanDuel. I do apologize if I sound weird again. I don't know what it is, but something's wrecking my body and I cannot breathe. So anyway, Allen here versus the Jets. This is not the pushover matchup it was in seasons past where the Jets defense just wasn't anything that was going to offer too much resistance. They've actually been pretty solid defensively this year. I played them on many slates this season, and Sauce Gardner looks legit. The guy's a shutdown corner in the NFL. And Stephon Diggs, we'll see how he fares versus him. I'm still going to play the Buffalo Bills offense. I'm always going to give them the edge versus any defense that they face, and Vegas would probably agree here. 28.5 point implied team total for them on the road in New York, or I guess New Jersey, 11.5 point favorites despite that. And Allen's just been incredible this season. Over 300 yards passing per game, nearly 3 passing touchdowns, 8.3 yards per attempt. They throw the ball over 30 times per game. And just the icing on top here, he also offers you rushing upside. Only around 40s on runs per game, but that does not include all the scrambles that he can do. Over 40 rushing yards, which is kind of like a built-in passing touchdown floor, added to the fact that he's averaging 3 passing touchdowns per game nearly, and over 300 passing yards, which is that 3-point bonus on DraftKings, which is almost another passing touchdown floor kind of built in. The guy's just incredible. He's the best fantasy quarterback in the league. And the matchup versus the Jets, like I said, it's not a pushover matchup these days. They're only allowing 220 passing yards per game, and their 8th DVOA, in addition to allowing the 8th fewest points per game to fantasy quarterbacks. So not an amazing matchup, but the same can be said for the New York Jets defense. I know they're on the road, which I guess I would prefer if they're in Buffalo, but I don't care. Give me all the Buffalo Bills stacks that I can handle. And if you are playing cash games, he is definitely the safest option. You don't have to play him in tournaments, but if you are playing cash games, I would feel pretty good about that. Dropping down to Kyler Murray here, $7,400. This is going to be a pretty good game for fantasy purposes. I'm definitely going to have quite a bit of exposure to it. 49.5 point over under here with only 1.5 point spread. I just basically like everything about this game. And with DeAndre Hopkins returning for Arizona, it's just even easier of a stack. Obviously, we lost Hollywood Brown, but Hopkins has filled in quite nicely. Does not look washed or anything. He looks incredible so far for the first 2 weeks that he's returned. And he gets a great matchup here versus the Seattle Seahawks defense that has just not been very good this year. They've been a little bit worse versus the run, but I wouldn't say their pass defense is anything too crazy. 21st versus fantasy quarterbacks, although they are 14th DVOA versus the pass, but this is definitely a beatable matchup for the Arizona Cardinals offense. 25.5 point implied team total here at home. Kyler Murray this year hasn't really been a guy I've rostered. I don't think I've played him once outside of showdown slates. And I mean, I guess that's probably been a good call. Yes, he does offer the rushing upside. Over 40s on runs per game, nearly 40 rushing yards, which is kind of like that built-in passing touchdown right in there. Throwing the ball nearly 40 times per game, which is great, but only 6.1 yards per attempt, 1.25 touchdown per game, and less than 250 passing yards. Hasn't exactly been amazing for Kyler Murray, but getting a guy like DeAndre Hopkins back is definitely huge for offense, even though you I don't want to say evened out because Hopkins is a better receiver than Hollywood Brown, but it does suck that they did lose him. But I think Kyler's fine, but probably only a tournament option only for me. Justin Herbert at $7,200, another 49.5 point over under here, 3-point spread, 26.25 implied team total for the Los Angeles Chargers, and they get a dream matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons, who have been terrible defensively this season versus the past. 30th DVOA, 29th versus fantasy quarterbacks, and allowing a whopping 318 passing yards per game. Now, if Herbert had all of his top weapons in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, he would probably be the chalk quarterback this week, but we know Mike Williams is out for sure, and Keenan Allen is currently questionable, although he still hasn't practiced this week, so I have a hard time seeing him play. So that leaves us with like Gerald Everett, the 2 other tight ends that play a lot, We have Joshua Palmer, and then DeAndre Carter, and then obviously Austin Ekeler's been a wide receiver basically this season with the massive amount of targets he's getting so far this year, so you can kind of throw him in the same group as those guys. But yeah, Herbert's going to be down his 2 top weapons as far as receivers are concerned, which is definitely going to take a hit. If they were playing, I mean, yeah, I think Herbert does end up being the most popular quarterback on the slate. And he has been solid this year in the yards department, nearly 300 passing yards per game, throwing the ball over 40 times per game, but similar to Kyler Murray in that 6 yards per attempt department, and the touchdowns haven't been incredible for him, less than 2 per game this season. And unfortunately, he does not offer you the kind of rushing upside of the other guys like Josh Allen and Kyler Murray. But with that being said, with the 2 top options being out, that does make these stacks a bit cheaper if you're going to exclude Austin Ekeler. So if you want to do a Justin Herbert, Joshua Palmer stack, you're really not breaking the bank, and you can run that back with a guy like Drake London, although I have a personal vendetta against Drake London where I don't want to play him anymore, so I'm not sure I'll be doing that. I guess you don't technically need a run back in those kind of stacks, but Herbert's a fine option. Just know that you're probably going to be without his 2 top receiving options, but you still have Austin Ekeler at least. Aaron Rodgers at $5,900. It seems really cheap, but I was looking at his game log. He has not surpassed 20 fantasy points this year, I believe, but that could certainly change here versus Detroit. I mean, good things happen when you face Detroit offensively. They've just been so bad on defense this year. Another 49.5 point implied or over under here, 26.5 implied team total, 3.5 point spread. Should be pretty back and forth, and this is not an expensive stack at all, because if you're stacking Aaron Rodgers, you're using guys like Robert Tonyan, who I believe is in the 3K range, Robert Dobbs, who I want to say is in the 5K range, and you can run it back with a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, and you're really not breaking the bank there. So while Rodgers has not been good this year for DFS purposes, and really in real life, I mean, 225 passing yards per game, only throwing the ball 31 times per game, and obviously doesn't offer any rushing upside. But it's really all about the matchup here. I mean, the lines are dead last, 32nd DVA versus the pass, allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. At $5,900, if he can just get you 2 touchdowns and 250 plus yards, it's not going to kill you. I think in cash games, you could get the Aaron Rodgers. I feel like he's going to be the 2nd highest owned quarterback on the slate behind Josh Allen. I believe that's what I have it currently right now. I could see a couple guys getting flipped in and out there just because Rodgers has not been great this year. And I could see Aaron Jones getting some ownership, so people might not want to double up on Rodgers and Aaron Jones. But definitely an option because of the matchup, and the price point does project out pretty well point per dollar wise this week on the road in Detroit. Then Geno Smith, $5,800. Like, if you don't want to go with Rodgers, I would totally understand wanting to go the Geno route just because he's actually been a bit better this year, at least for fantasy purposes. Now, I know they're the same price point, and I feel like I could trust Rodgers over Geno Smith, but Geno really has not been that bad this year. And he's going down the field a little bit more, 7.7 yards per attempt, just about the same exact touchdowns per game as Aaron Rodgers, a little bit better completion percentage, and a little bit more rushing upside, which I guess does make Geno slightly more valuable. In the matchup versus Arizona, also pretty good, not as good as Detroit, but they're 23rd DVA versus the pass, 26th versus fantasy quarterbacks. You have obvious stacking options with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I guess you could look at a tight end like Will Disley and Noah Fant. They've been terrible defensively versus tight ends this year, but I do think Geno is a fine option here, and you can play him in tournaments. And if you do the Seattle stack, you can run it back with a guy like DeAndre Hopkins quite easily. And if you're looking for the gross stack of the week, I actually don't mind the Jacksonville Jaguars here. Trevor Lawrence is $5,200. They're facing the Raiders at home, 47.5 point over under here, 23 point implied team total with a 1.5 point spread. This game has some sneaky shootout upside. I will say Travis Etienne looks like he's going to be the chalk running back of the week, so I'm not sure a lot of people are going to go with the Trevor Lawrence and the pass catchers, but I think that makes for a pretty decent pivot in tournaments, and they are free. So if you do go that route, I mean, you can play whoever else you want at running back or wide receiver if you want, just to load up on some studs. And while I know Lawrence hasn't exactly been great this year, only 230 passing yards per game and 1.25 passing touchdowns, I'm really just chasing a good matchup here versus the Raiders. They are second to dead last DVA versus the pass, and the same could be said in fantasy points allowed per game to the quarterback position. And the stacking options are quite easy. You can look at Evan Ingram, who's really cheap. You have Christian Kirk and even Zay Jones. You can run that back with a guy like Devontae Adams, and that's actually not too bad for an ugly tournament stack. And moving over to our lineup, I'm not really sure which quarterback I want to go with. I don't think I played Kyler Murray in any of these builds so far this year for any of the videos. So just for fun, let's go with the Kyler stack. Obviously, we're going to run in Hopkins there at the wide receiver position. And we'll have to pick one of, or even both if we wanted to get crazy, of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. But just for something new, I want to go with the Kyler route. And moving on to the running backs, actually a lot of good options here, whether you want to go up top, in the middle, or kind of down low. I wouldn't say there's any punts this week. We'll start up top with Austin Ekeler, $8,800 on DraftKings, $9,400 on FanDuel. Gets a great matchup here versus Atlanta. I already mentioned I do like the Charger stack here, and Mike Williams is out. Keenan Allen looks like he's trending in the wrong direction. So if he happens to be out, Austin Ekeler is just really forced into a pass catching role, which he already does anyway, but it just puts more of an emphasis on it. And if you look at the numbers this season, it's kind of insane. I mean, nearly 8.5 targets per game for a running back is amazing. Over 7.5 catches, nearly half a receiving touchdown per game, and over a 20% target share. And that's on a team that throws the ball nearly 40 times per game, so that's very healthy. 51 receiving yards per game. And to the fact that he's the main threat on the ground, 12 carries, 54 rushing yards, and nearly a rushing touchdown per game. I mean, he's just a touchdown scoring machine. He's heavily involved in the passing game. It's kind of like you're getting two players to one here, kind of like a CMC a couple years back, but at a pretty fair price point, $800, and a great matchup versus Atlanta, who's 26th DFS versus the run, terrible versus the pass, and 20th versus fantasy running back. So if you have the money for Ekeler, I love it. If you're using Herbert, I'd pretty much recommend getting Ekeler in there anyway, even though it feels weird correlating a running back with your quarterback. Austin Ekeler is a bit of a different breed there. Aaron Jones, $7,400. I honestly am never a fan of playing Aaron Jones. I hardly ever do it, but if there's ever a time to do it, it's here versus Detroit. 26.5 point implied team total. They're 3.5 point favorites. And while he's not a workhorse that's going to get you those 20 plus carries, he is involved in the passing game, and he's usually very efficient with the work that he gets. He does have to split some time with A.J. Dillon, but he's clearly the better back in this offense. A.J. Dillon's been very disappointing this year, but he's at nearly 6 yards per carry this season, which is excellent. And the matchup versus Detroit, well, it's one of the best you can get. 30th DA versus the run, 29th versus fantasy running backs, allowing over 120 rushing yards per game. I am not, like I said, I don't usually play Aaron Jones much. I'm just not a big fan of it, but I do think he's in a great spot here, and you can't ignore it. But if he's going to be pretty high owned, I feel like in tournaments I might go a different direction. And then moving on to Josh Jacobs here, $7,300. He disappointed last week. Looks like he's going to be very high owned once again this week versus Jacksonville, but they've been just not very good versus the run whatsoever. We actually look at the specific matchup here. They are 26th versus fantasy running backs, and also 20th DVA versus the run. I think he's fine from a volume standpoint here. He's been great this season, nearly 20 carries per game, close to a rushing touchdown, close to 100 rushing yards, and also had a very nice 5.6 yards per carry. And the nice thing for Jacobs this season, he has seen more involvement in the passing game. He's playing nearly all the snaps, but over 3.5 targets per game on 11% target share. Very good numbers. The price is fine at $7,300. Definitely think he's a solid option. The thing is, though, I think Travis Etienne's also going to be very high owned, so I'm not sure if we're going to play both running backs in the same game because that typically does not correlate that well. So if I had to pick between the two, I'd probably go with Etienne because he's cheaper, but both are fine options. Joe Mixon, $6,500. It's cheap. I know Mixon has not been very good this year on the ground whatsoever. He's only averaging 54 rushing yards per game. The volume's nice, though. It's 16 per game, but I mean, only 3.3 yards per carry. That's terrible. That's almost half of what Aaron Jones and half of what Travis Etienne are at this season. At least the volume's there, and he's seen uptick usage in the passing game, over 5 targets per game and over 4 catches and a 14.5% target share. And with no Jamar Chase, maybe that gets him a couple more targets throughout the game, but the offensive line is brutal, and with no Jamar Chase, the offense looked really bad versus the Cleveland Browns on Monday night. But they are 7-point favorites here versus the Carolina Panthers at home, 24.75 implied team total here for the Cincinnati Bengals. So if he can just fall into the end zone, I don't think it'll be bad. Like, even if he doesn't score, if he can get you those catches, he can get there. But if Mixon does not get into the end zone, you're probably not going to be extremely happy with the output. But I do think he's a solid option on DraftKings because of how cheap he is. Travis Etienne, he looks like the best player running back this week. Good matchup here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. We just saw Alvin Kamara just go nuclear versus them last week. I'm not calling Etienne Alvin Kamara, but he's a pretty good running back in his own right. And when they shipped off James Robinson, he's just the clear-cut back. And he was already getting phased out anyway. And I kind of saw the trends going in Etienne's favor, and it's been working out. I mean, he went off last week in London versus the Denver Broncos. And so far this season for the Las Vegas Raiders, they're 24th versus fantasy running backs, 18th DVA versus the pass. And I know this can be a bit of a noisy stat here, but they are allowing nearly 8 catches per game to fantasy running backs, which Etienne is a fine pass catcher. So like the volume that we've seen recently, he's at 6.2 yards per carry, so he has been efficient with his touches. I like him all here at this price point, kind of probably going to end up being a cash lock for me. Ramondre Stevenson, $6,200. Even though Damian Harris is back, he's still the main back here. He's going to lead in snaps, and I think the price point's pretty good here versus the Colts. They're 4.5 point favorites at home. The only bad thing about ever playing the Patriots is that just such a boring team. It's slow, 40.5 point over under here, 22.5 implied team total, but the guy's been good. I mean, nearly 15 carries per game, close to 5 yards per carry, and he's more involved in the passing game, 16.3% target share, so I like Stevenson a lot at this price point. Kenneth Walker is also another fair price point. I just don't think DraftKings is ever going to price the guy up. But ever since Rashad Penny's went down, the guy has been pretty good, $6,200. Didn't do a lot of damage in the yards department last week, but he did get into the end zone on a pretty nice touchdown run. In this game, I'm definitely expecting some points to be scored. And while the Cardinals are worse versus the pass, they're kind of just mid-pack when it comes to the fantasy running backs. So I still think Walker is definitely in play here. Then Raheem Mostert at $6,100. The Bears have been awful versus the run this year, but better versus the pass, allowing the 5th most points bringing into fantasy running backs. And they're also 28th DVA versus the run. We've seen Raheem Mostert definitely get the bulk of the work in recent weeks. 25-point implied team total here. And the Dolphins are 4.5-point favorites on the road in Chicago. So I do think he's a fine pivot option. Don't really expect him to have too much ownership whatsoever. And moving back over to our lineup, lots of options we can go with our running back. Just already talked about them all. If we want to spin up, we can go with Austin Ekeler. Although I think I'm going to try to find some value. I haven't really been one to spend up a running back this year. I've been spending up for the stud, either tight ends, depending on what slate it's going to be, or just the wide receivers. And it seems to be working out for me. So I'm going to continue that strat. Obviously, it's fine if you want to spend up sometimes. Like Austin Ekeler, I might throw in an Austin Ekeler lineup this week. But as someone that plays 3 max, I am kind of limited on some of my exposure on main slates. Showdowns, I do 150. But Travis Etienne, he's going to be the guy that kind of stands out the most to me. Love the usage recently, and he's looked pretty good. And I do want exposure to that Las Vegas and Jacksonville game, but since I'm not going with the Trevor Lawrence stack here, I'm probably not getting too much of the passing game whatsoever. Then I like Stevenson for $100 less. I mean, I kind of didn't really sell this as much, but the usage in the passing game has been great. I mean, we're talking 15 targets the past 2 weeks. Now, is that going to keep up throughout the season? I'm not totally sure we're going to see that much, but I mean, the usage has been fantastic. 72 yards through the air, 71 yards on the ground. I mean, Stevenson's been very good. He's a good running back, and the Patriots are really starting to realize that now, which I absolutely love. So we're going to roll with those 2 guys. We have just over $5,000 left for the remaining spots, which once you factor in probably a cheaper tight end defense, that actually feels pretty good. And moving on to the wide receivers, big list here as always, and it's extremely loaded up top this weekend. And as I always say, I mean, we can break down the individual matchups for these guys, but I think that's always a bit noisy. Good wide receivers usually win their matchups more often than not. It's really hard as an NFL corner to stop some of these guys these days. So the matchups, well, yes, it's nice if you have a good matchup. That's definitely a plus. But if your matchup's bad, I really don't think it's that big of a deal. And really, it all comes down to the wide receiver position. Like, yes, it's fine to have some guys as one-off in cash games and stuff like that. That's totally fine. But really, for the most part, it comes down to what quarterback am I using, who's my stacking options, who's my run back options in those stacks, and things like that. So try to hit on these guys kind of quickly because we could talk about wide receiver versus quarterback matchups forever, but I do find them a bit noisy. Anyway, Justin Jefferson, great matchup up top versus the Washington Commanders. They've been awful versus the pass this year, 28th DVOA and 23rd versus fantasy wide receivers. If you need me to tell you that Justin Jefferson's good at catching the football, you probably shouldn't be playing fantasy football. Same can be said for Tyreek Hill. The Bears are a little bit better versus the pass than they are versus the run, but Hill's just been incredible this year. I mean, 120 receiving yards per game, leading everybody in air yards by a decent margin, 32.5% target share. Just been incredible. Love Tyreek Hill every single week if you can afford him. Stephon Diggs, if you're using Josh Allen, you kind of have to force your way into Diggs because if Allen goes off, well, that means pretty much Diggs has to go off as well. He's got a receiving touchdown per game this year, 10 targets, 110 receiving yards. Guy's been an absolute stud in that offense. Devontae Adams, I don't think anyone's going to play Adams this week because if you played him last weekend, you probably never want to play him again. I totally understand that. I forget how many points he scored, but last I looked, he had like -1 yard or something like that. It was bad. I don't know exactly what he finished with, but it wasn't pretty. But he's still going to see the volume, 9 targets per game, close to a touchdown per game. And if you are stacking the Jaguars, like I have some interest in this weekend, well, you got to run it back with somebody. Now, obviously, you could go the Josh Jacobs route. That is totally fine. But if you want to go with the pass catcher, well, Adams is the guy. And I really think that ownership's going to be pretty low after with what happened last weekend. DeAndre Hopkins, probably my favorite wide receiver on the slate here. I mean, in the 2 games that he's played since returning, 37.5% target share, 97% weighted opportunity share, 58% market share of the team's air yards, 13.5 targets per game, and over 130 receiving yards. And if you're looking at the Seahawks this year versus the wide receiver position, they've actually been pretty stingy. 4th versus fantasy wide receivers, 14th DVA versus the pass. But Hopkins is a different breed. The guy's good. He's going to get all the targets. And since I have Kyler Murray in this specific lineup, yeah, we're playing Hopkins. And I think you should be probably on par with guys like Diggs and Hill as far as the price point's concerned. So getting him below 8K seems like a bargain. Amon-Ra St. Brown, love this price point, $6,600. If you are stacking up that Packers game, it's not expensive at all. Like Rodgers below 6K, Dobbs down here is $5,300, and St. Brown's below 7K. I mean, it's really easy to stack up. St. Brown getting over 8 targets per game this year. Didn't really go off last week. I used him in my Dolphins stack, and he's all right. He got me double-digit points, which is fine, but I would have liked him to get into the end zone or a little bit more in the yardage department. But seeing over 8 targets per game, close to 60 receiving yards, half a receiving touchdown. Should get peppered with targets here. And I do expect the Lions to be trailing versus the Packers. Chris Godwin, not a ton of interest in this Bucs offense. They just look, they look anemic in seasons past, and obviously Brady's declining a little bit, and with whatever is going on in his personal life, that obviously probably isn't helping. But Godwin is always a consistent source of fantasy points. 8 targets per game, a little bit over that, close to 6 catches, 61 receiving yards. It's just a matter of him getting to the end zone or not, which he has yet to do so this year. But once he starts scoring touchdowns, that $6,200 price point will really feel like a bargain. Tyler Lockett, if you are stacking up this game like I am, I think he's an obvious run back option. You could go with DK Metcalf. I don't have him on here for some reason. I probably should have put him on here, but I think both Seattle Seahawks wide receivers are fine, but I always seem to prefer Tyler Lockett over DK Metcalf. He's getting over 7 targets per game this year, nearly 6 catches, and he always seems to have good games versus Arizona. I know this game absolutely busted the first time. I think the score was like 19-9. Geno scored, I want to say, 9 points. Kyler Murray was okay at 19, but I'm expecting this one to be a little bit better this time around. Christian Kirk, $5,500 if you are stacking up the Jacksonville Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence, you got to pair him up with his number one, Christian Kirk, seeing over 7 targets per game this year, 24% target share. And Kirk was kind of on the downswing, but the past couple weeks have been a little bit better, at least. Romeo Doubs, if you're using Rodgers, he's my preferred option there. Yes, there's some other wide receivers that are playable, but I think he's probably the preferred option for me, seeing close to 6 targets per game. Joshua Palmer, DeAndre Carter. Mike Williams is out, we know that. Keenan Allen looks like he's trending in the wrong direction. Joshua Palmer is currently questionable, actually, with the concussion, but he cleared protocol. He did practice fully, so the assumption is that he plays, and if that's going to be the case, looks like he could be the wide receiver 1 this week at $5,100 versus the Falcons, who I believe are allowing the most points per game to the wide receiver position this year at 48.6 in the 30th DVA versus the pass, and allowing over 200 receiving yards per game specifically to the wide receiver position. Yeah, that screams value to me. So Keenan Allen happens to be out. Palmer is probably going to end up being the chalk wide receiver. Then DeAndre Carter will certainly have a role as well. He saw 7 targets last week, and at $4,300, he could definitely have some tournament upside. And then Zay Jones, just kind of add on to that Jag stack. I like him at $4,100. He's seeing 7 targets per game this year with a 21% target share. I know it's only equating to 44 receiving yards per game, but the price point's pretty nice, and matchup versus the Raiders is pretty solid. And heading back over to our lineup, and yes, I realize the sun is sniping my forehead, but there's just nothing I can do. I put stuff up, but it still seems to seep its way through at me. But anyway, wide receiver here. I love all these spend-up options, but since we have Kyler Murray, we're kind of tired of using DeAndre Hopkins, which I am totally fine with. He's been an absolute stud these 2 weeks. And we need to run it back with a Seattle Seahawk. Obviously, we could roll Kenneth Walker out in the flex spot, but I don't want to use a wide receiver here. You could double up on Metcalf and Lockett. I actually would not have a problem with that. I'll leave a spot open just in case we want to go that route, but I'm going to take Lockett here, a few $100 cheaper. Bounced back last week, had a pretty good game, got into the end zone versus the New York Giants. Did drop a touchdown, but still had 16 fantasy points. I know he busted last time versus Arizona. 2 catches on 5 targets for 3.7 fantasy points, but I'm expecting better things from the Seahawks and the Arizona Cardinals in this game. I do think we could have a shootout for sure. But plugging those 2 in, we got over $4,000 left per player, which puts us right on track. Moving on to the tight ends, not a great position this week. No Travis Kelce, no Mark Andrews, so we're kind of left with whatever's left here. But we have Zach Ertz up top, $5,100. Gets the best possible matchup you can ask for as a tight end, as the Seattle Seahawks are dead last versus the position, allowing 20.5 fantasy points per game and nearly 75 receiving yards. Zach Ertz did not get into the end zone in his matchup versus Seattle a few weeks ago, but did have 10 targets, I believe, and a good chunk of yards. Was overall fine. I think around 14-ish fantasy points, if I remember correctly. But he's sitting around 7 targets per game this year, close to half a receiving touchdown per game on a 19% target share. Don't think he's a bad option, especially at the lineup we're building. I actually wouldn't mind getting Zach Ertz in there if we can afford him. Cal puts his 2 touchdowns the past 3 weeks, so it's nice to see him at least rebounding a little bit after a terrible start to the season. Still not a guy I really trust too much, but if you are stacking up the Chargers, he was going to be your best run back option because screw Drake London. Robert Tonyan, $3,800, got a touchdown called back last week on a pretty poor pass interference call, at least in my opinion. How some other people talking about it as well, but $3,800 versus Detroit, not a bad stacking option with Aaron Rodgers for a guy that's seeing over 5 targets per game and over 4 catches as well. Tyler Higbee, if you're just looking for a guy that gets consistent targets, we're talking nearly 8 targets per game on a 22% target share. Only $3,700 versus Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Don't mind that at all. Not excited about the Rams offense in this one in the slightest, but Higbee's price point is fine at a bad position. Hayden Hurst with no Jamar Chase just should at least see more involvement, more looks. Didn't really go off versus Cleveland or anything, but still sitting around 5 targets per game. And mainly just a price play here. I don't really have any of the Bengals listed. You can play T. Higgins, you can play Burrow, you can play Hurst if you want, but I'm just not really excited about this offense without Jamar Chase, to be honest. Evan Ingram, $3,300. He's actually been not bad this year, and he's pretty much free on DraftKings here, and he's seeing close to 6 targets per game, over 5.5 this year, on an 18% target share. And this is a team that will throw the football. In the matchup versus the Raiders, they're actually allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to the position, and they're also 31st DVA versus the pass, so definitely not a bad pump play in the slightest. Then as far as defenses are concerned, yes, the spend-up options, they're always going to be in good spots, but what I always do is I scroll all the way down and look for the most viable cheap defense because we have to save some money here. And it looks like the Panthers, pump per dollar wise, are grading out the best for me this week. I am at 6.5 points facing the Cincinnati Bengals. Yes, I know they're on the road. They're 7-point dogs. But the Bengals offensive line, not very good. Joe Burrow can turn the ball over here and there. And with no Jamar Chase, it definitely takes a hit to their offense. So while they do have a couple things working against them, I still like some of the reasons for that. And they're the 2nd cheapest defense on the slate. And the Panthers have some redeeming qualities on defense, and 42.5 point over-under is one of the lower ones on the entire slate. So yeah, the Panthers look like they're going to be pretty chalky this week. I could also see the Buccaneers versus the Rams don't look too bad. Under a 20 implied team total versus them at home, 3-point favorites, pretty low over-under, $3,000. Definitely don't think that's the worst spot in the world. Everything else besides just spend-up options don't look that great to me. So probably looking at the Bucs and the Panthers for me defensively this week. If you can't quite fit them in your lineups, I don't really care. Just throw in whoever fits. Just don't use it against one of the better quarterbacks on the slate. And to finish off our lineup, we have 4 spots left. Wide receiver 3, tight end, flex, and a defense. Let's just plug in the Panthers defense here to see what kind of money we're actually working with. That's $4,600 left per player, which isn't a lot. So we're going to have to get some value plays, which is fine though. We already have kind of our core of the lineup built. Some all very solid plays here. So let's find a tight end to correlate with Kyler Murray. That would obviously be Zach Ertz. We got the double stack going on with the Lockett run back. I like that. $4,300 left for the last 2 spots. So we're going to have to get a cheaper wide receiver here, probably in the 4K range. We could look at a guy like DeAndre Carter. We could look at Zay Jones, who I believe is $4,100, which I don't mind at all. But we would be doubling up on the Jaguars offense, which I don't think is the absolute worst thing in the world. So if we do that, I do think they're going to put up some points versus the Raiders, and they're both cheap. At least it's $4,600 left for the last spot. That could be anybody like a Kyle Pitts, although I don't want to double up at tight end. Usually not the best way to go about it. DeAndre Carter, if Keenan Allen happens to be out, he's going to be forced into some work. If you wanted to open up some more salary, though, you could always take out Kyler Murray for a guy like Geno Smith at $5,100 because it actually still fits our lineup since we have Lockett, we have Hopkins. You're just switching quarterbacks. And that would open up a lot more salary. Obviously, it wouldn't have to use Zach Ertz, but $6,200 left in the flex spot definitely feels a lot better than having $4,600. And especially if you go with a cheaper tight end, you could throw anybody you want in here. It could end up being a guy like Robert Tonyan. I wouldn't mind that. That leaves you $7,500 left. And then that really starts to open up your lineup. But many ways you can go this week. Don't just copy and paste the lineup you see on YouTube because it's only Friday. A lot of things will change, and there's no guarantee I play a lineup like that. And like I said earlier, doing it on the optimizer here to see who's popping the most as of right now with the projections I have in place on Friday morning. Keep in mind, guys, a lot of things can change by then, guys being rolled out and whatnot, so things will change throughout the weekend. So if you want the updated stuff and if you want to use this yourself, link is down below in the description for that. And I do have one for the NBA as well, which is updated throughout the day up until lock, and even after lock if we happen to get some crazy news. But just running it raw here. No settings, no groups, nothing like that. And it looks like we got our 152 crunch here. So let's open up the players tab and see who is popping. So yeah, a lot of Travis Etienne, a lot of Stevenson. It's always nice when the projections line up with what your internal thoughts are. And we already plugged both of those guys in our lineup that we were building. So I feel pretty good about that. Lots of Tyler Higbee, lots of Godwin. Zay Jones is popping. Buccaneers defense. That's a lot of Drake London. Look, I don't want to play Drake London. I hate the guy. He just doesn't do anything at all. I would probably not play him, to be honest. But the projections like him. I think it's just because he's dirt cheap at $4,900. Josh Allen, St. Brown. So yeah, not too surprised at all who's popping up the most here. Looking at the teams, tons of Jacksonville, lots of Tampa, lots of New England, Rams, Falcons, Buffalo. And looking at the games in general, yeah, that Jacksonville Raiders game is definitely going to have quite a bit of ownership. Tampa Bay versus the Rams. So yeah, just some fun stuff you can look at when you're building lineups. You can look at statistics of everything. And if, like I said, if you do want access to this, link is down below in the description for that. With that being said, guys, that's all I got for you guys this week. I hope you did enjoy. And if you did, make sure you leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Hopefully I feel better soon, so I don't sound too weird. But I wish you all the best of luck, and I'll see you all next time.